leave it alone. Again, we need to look at, there's a discrepancy within the contract language of how many holidays are allowed to be taken in hourly increments. Again, there's an FMLA impact to that depending upon how you write your policy, and so therefore I would limit that number to whatever makes sense within the department. Again, this is another thing where holidays are earned all the way up front. Again, they can bank them, they can use them. There's different pay provisions if I work them. That whole area just really needs to be cleaned up. Again, the amount of time is fine, but we just need to kind of clean up. Do I get my holidays all at once? I've got some clients that are just saying, look, we're just going to give you the 192 hours again as a bonus, and you work what you work, and there's no extra time. And a lot of your comparables have that, so that's something you need to look at. There are some folks that have developed a time and a half if it's Christmas Day, and again, you can look at that and see what makes sense. But for the most part, other than looking at some sort of accrual methodology, your holidays are very typical and close to your comparables. Union days, your contract allows for 20 days over a 3-year contract to be used for union affairs. In addition, each employee donates an additional 6 hours of floating holiday time, or adding another 444 hours to that bank. You also have something that's very unique, is that 100 hours is allotted for a state or national office. I think someone accused me of getting inside information from somebody. It didn't take a rocket scientist to read your contract to figure out that's not necessarily a typical benefit that's provided for union business. Recommendation, eliminate the 6 hours. Your 20 hours over a 3-year period is very comparable to everybody else. Eliminate the 100 hours. It was supposedly a sweetheart deal that somebody got a long time ago. Get rid of it. You don't need it. One thing your contract is silent on is all of your surrounding neighbors have at least 2 individuals that are allowed to be off duty for attendance at union functions. That's typically conferences and seminars and things of that nature. Your contract does not limit that, which means you open your exposure again for the number of people that are gone. This does not limit how many people can attend. It just limits how many people you're going to be allowed off work during that conference or seminar. And right now, your contract is silent. Uniform allowance, you receive $1,000 annually for the replacement of uniforms. The average around the area is $540. You have quite a few programs around you, which is a quartermaster system, which means in order to get the money, I actually have to give you the piece of clothing back. Right now, it's just $1,000 that can be used for anything. I'm not making any changes at this point in time. There's no need to. I just would say that you don't need to increase it for a couple of years and let folks around you catch up on it, but leave it alone right now. Contract negotiations. You need to maintain some consistency. I heard there's a variety of different combinations of city negotiating teams, with attorneys, without attorneys, with mayors, without mayors, with safety services directors, without safety service directors. That was what can cause problems throughout the years. And so therefore you need to have some consistency. Who needs to be at the table? I'm going to talk about in a few minutes human resources. You need to have somebody from human resources. You need to have somebody who has the consistency among all employees within this organization to make sure that there's fair, equitable distribution of benefits among all employees, as well as taking in the unique differences that each department might have. Right now, 9 times out of 10, the fire chief is not at the table. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Your fire chief or the second in command needs to be at that table. You need to have somebody who's going to say, this is how this is going to affect fire operations. Absent that person, people like myself can make all kinds of decisions and not realize the ramifications that it's going to have on the operations. And in some cases, you need to have a labor attorney. I would highly recommend in this organization, if it's at all possible, you try to change your negotiation stance and look at something called consensus bargaining. And that's instead of coming in with our laundry list of ideas that we're going to bicker and yell about across the table, we identify problems and we work together to develop those solutions. It does work. I've done it in every organization that I've been with, no offense except with FOP. For some reason, cops didn't like it. But we did it with everybody else. When it came to a fire contract in another municipality, we actually instituted a paramedic training program rewrote 3/4 of the language, and there was only one attorney sitting at the table who represented both sides. And at times we probably sounded more like labor and they sounded more like management, but we worked together to come up with the solutions. There's a lot of issues within this contract, which means there's a lot of opportunities, and you need to work together to determine what those are. I know when the draft report, there are some people that didn't like this. You need to keep the politics out of it. It's very evident by reading this report, it's littered with politics. Someone did a favor for somebody on both sides of the table. I'm not blaming the city, I'm not blaming just the union, it's both of you. You need to concentrate on wages, hours, and working conditions, what's fair to the employee, and more importantly, how are you serving the citizens of this community in a cost-effective and efficient manner. Let's get the sweetheart deals out of here. This organization has a good habit of negotiating in the press. Enough said. Few slides and we'll give you a break. Manuals, overall, I'm sorry, the city needs an employee handbook. You have no employee handbook. There is a lot of language in the firefighter contract that doesn't need to be there, and it's probably there because it's no place else. There's no reason why IRS mileage rates should be in the contract. It should be a city manual that applies to all employees. You need a manual. You need to codify all the rules and regulations. The fire department has a great SOG manual. However, no one knows about it. No one's trained on it. And in fact, most people had a hard time finding a copy for us. It hasn't been updated in quite a while. I know since the new chiefs have been on board, a whole 2 months, they've dusted it off and they're starting to take a look at it. It needs to be up to date, it needs to be trained on, it needs to be implemented, and employees all through the fire department need to be held accountable for it. Get a labor management committee and start working on it together. This doesn't have to be one person's project who gets stuck in the back room. Get everyone involved in developing what are the best operations for the Elyria Fire Department. I know you're in fiscal time periods. I'm also biased. My background is human resources. You need an HR director for the city. Right now, you have that function spread out as components of pieces and multiple people. That's why a lot of the stuff is falling through the cracks. This cannot be a political appointee. This needs to be a person who is screened through some sort of committee, who has an HR background, who's worked in a municipality before, who has experience with contract negotiations. The rule of thumb is one HR person for every 150 employees. You're well past that. Plus you have, what, 12, 13 unions? You need somebody who's trained in HR to help bring that whole process together. The fire department needs leadership. There's been a leadership void. A lot of these areas could be cleaned up with strong leadership. I'll tell you right now, you've had some folks that have served it as interim. Right now, a couple of them are under fire. Why, I don't know. I'm not sure I want to step in to be fire chief of this organization. As an interim, there's only so much they can do. They don't have the full scope of authority. And so I applaud those individuals that took the leap and went up and tried to do something within a limited time period. You need somebody permanent, you need somebody stable. With that said, I know you have a new fire chief, and he and I have chatted about this already. I have nothing against the new fire chief. I think he's a great guy. The problem is, you don't have a fire chief that has been trained. Instead, what you have is what I call a civil service commission that promotes inbreeding. I'm here, I get to advance to the next level regardless of my skills, qualities, and education. It doesn't make the chief a bad person. That doesn't mean he can't be a leader. But he hasn't been trained in that area. It's one thing to command a fire. It's another thing to sit in front of you and explain my department, put my budget together, and handle personnel administration.